on Making of New India by the visionary Raja Ram Mohan Roy. The program is being organized by the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry jointly with EIILM Kolkata and powered by India Power Corporation Limited, IPCL. So before we commence the program, I would like to share some technological briefing with the participants and the speakers. The participants, you are on mute. You may also please keep your video off, which will help in bandwidth and it would be for ease of the proceedings of the program. And the speakers, you have been given the right of mute or unmute by yourselves the microphone. So you are requested to please keep a note of your microphone status as we are proceeding with the program. We would now request the President of the Bengal Chamber, Mr. Debe Mukherjee, to kindly deliver the formal welcome address. Mr. Mukherjee, please.
Thank you very much, Angana, and a very good evening to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, who have come online for this panel discussion on Making of New India by the visionary Raja Ram Mohan Roy. At the outset, I would like to apologize for a bit of a technical glitch that I have with my laptop. Maybe it's the laptop is a little annoyed with me because I have been online addressing various sessions, etc., meetings for the last 6 hours. So the camera has packed up. So apologies for that. But I understand I'm audible, and I take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this evening's online panel discussion. When we talk about Ram Mohan Roy, it is a great feeling we all cherish, because here is a man who, at this point in time, almost 250 years since he passed away in 1833, but he was born in 1772, and next year we would be celebrating his 250th birth anniversary. Here was a man who was not only far ahead of his times, but the vision that Raja Ram Mohan Roy had, the values that Raja Ram Mohan Roy cherished, and the causes that he championed truly make him not only just the father of the Renaissance man, or the father of the culture, social and religious renaissance of India, but truly the father of modern India, much more than a mere social reformer. The sheer liberal spirit, what is unique about Raja Ram Mohan Roy to my mind, is that here we see the deep connect between the spiritual insight of India and the scientific temperament of the Western world. So this truly liberal spirit of Western education and the deep scientific temper make Raja Ram Mohan far, far ahead of his times. And the causes, what's most interesting and pertinent, is that the causes that Raja Ram Mohan Roy championed are even relevant 200 years down the line. Today we are talking of gender equality, we are talking about equitable and inclusive growth, and above all, we are talking about liberal thinking, liberal spirit. All these ideas and values were deeply cherished and practiced by Raja Ram Mohan Roy 200 years back. So it's indeed very heartening, and I'm extremely happy that the Heritage Committee of the Chamber, under the leadership of GM, Mr. GM Kapoor, and the Secretariat, supported by the Secretariat, have put together this session where we will be talking about, experts will be talking about how Ram Mohan Roy has contributed to the making of New India, how his ideas, how his deep understanding of societal issues makes him relevant even today. So on this note, I welcome all of you to this evening's online program discussion. And of course, I extend my sincerest gratitude and thanks to all the sponsors and to all the organizations who have contributed and have lent support in making this evening's program a success. And we all look forward to the deliberations of the experts who would be speaking this evening. Enjoy the evening, ladies and gentlemen, and look forward to a very stimulating discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We would now request Mr. G.M. Kapoor, Chairperson, the Heritage Committee of the Bengal Chamber and State Convener of INTAC, to deliver the theme address and set the agenda for the evening. Mr. Kapoor, please.
Thank you, Angana, and thank you, President Mukherjee. You have very lucidly elaborated on the subject by and large, so I will not waste time in repeating what you have said, but I, of course, extend a great invitation and a very pleasant invitation to all the speakers as well as the panelists and the participants. This is a very special online panel discussion, Making of New India by the visionary Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And this is to start the celebrations of the 250th birth anniversary of this great visionary. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, as you are all aware, is known as the person who started the Renaissance in Bengal. And I will not elaborate on this great personality, but the very fact that he has so many ideas, as I said, before his time, and a lot of which is relevant to the chamber's activities today. He spoke on the freedom of the press. He spoke on judicial reforms. He spoke on administrative reforms, tax reforms, development of Bengali devotional songs composed by him. He had very wide-ranging political views. He was a man, even today would be relevant. He is, of course, very much relevant, but what I'm saying is that at that time, he was so much ahead of his time. Anyway, my invitation to all of you is to please listen to the deliberations and participate in this adda, which our friend Dr. Debanjan Chakravarti is going to very ably manage. And I am sure it will be an enthralling experience. We look forward to your kind participation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Angana.
Yes. So with this, we are moving on to the panel discussion. We have very distinguished panel of our experts today. The panel would be moderated by Dr. Debanjan Chakraborty. He is a member of Heritage Committee of the Bengal Chamber and Director East and Northeast British Council Division, British Deputy High Commission. He has over 18 years of experience in leading education, development and cultural collaboration programs in India and internationally for British Council. He is a triple gold medalist in English literature from Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and Felix Scholar, and obtained his PhD in literature and media studies from the University of Reading, UK. He has been a journalist and taught English literature and films at Vishwabharati University in Shantiniketan and University of Reading. And as panelists, we have Dr. Professor Ranjan Chakraborty, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Vidyasagar University. Professor Chakraborty has taught history at Jadavpur University and Vishwabharati University. A former Fulbright visiting professor at Brown University, a recipient of the prestigious Charles Wallace Fellowship at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and Alexander O. Vietor Memorial Fellowship at Brown University. The next panelist we have Dr. Aniruddha Sharnal, documentarian, Philadelphia, United States of America. Dr. Sharnal, with a PhD in financial economics, works in the domain of data science applied to financial services. He is also a documentary filmmaker. The other panelist we have Ms. Rupa Mojumdar, editor and director Dev Sahitya Kutir Private Limited. Ms. Mojumdar is the editor of the two magazines published by Dev Sahitya Kutir, Nabokallon and Shuktara. We can all relate to the Origist, who has over 3 decades of experience in power in utility sector. He is chairperson of the Bengal Chamber's People Management Committee. He is also a distinguished member of West Bengal Labour Welfare Board and a member of governing body of West Bengal State Productivity Council. He is in the executive committee of the Employers Federation of India and is a member of the Central Board of Workers' Education Government of India. He is also the employers representatives of Regional Committee of Employees Provident Fund, West Bengal. Mr. Dashgupta is a graduate in mechanical engineering and postgraduate in human resource management and holds a certificate in total quality management from BITS, Sweden. We have Dr. Shati Bhattacharjee, journalist and author. Dr. Bhattacharjee is a senior assistant editor, editorial page Anandabazar Potrika, Kolkata. Before this, she was the chief reporter, district ABP, leading a team of about 135 reporters, photographers and sub-editors. She has worked as reporter and as feature writer for ABP and the Telegraph in Kolkata and in Delhi. She has a PhD in social science from Tata Institute of Social Studies, Mumbai, and an MSc in media research from University of Stirling, UK, and an MA in philosophy from Jadavpur University. Professor Dr. R.P. Banerjee, Chairman and Director, Eastern Institute of Integrated Learning in Management, that is EIILM, Kolkata. With a rich experience of over 3.5 decades, Professor Dr. Ramaprasad Banerjee, R.P. Banerjee, perfectly harmonizes academic brilliance with industry expertise. Basically a professor of finance and ethics, as an international educationist, he has been focusing on the Indian spiritual values and spreading the fundamental message of Vedic civilization. He taught various areas of management in leading Indian and international organizations, including Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. He holds a PhD in management from Calcutta University and done his postdoc research at Stockholm University. He has authored 9 books and co-authored and contributed close to a dozen books. So we will start the session now. So I would request Dr. Chakraborty to please take it forward.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Can I just quickly have a sense check of the audio?
Yes, you are audible, sir.
Hi. Welcome everyone. Good evening. Shubho Sandhya janai shobaike. This is a remarkable lineup of speakers that we have assembled today, and I'm very thankful to the Heritage Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for having invited me, but also having put together such an illustrious panel, many of whom I've had the pleasure of being taught by. I've worked with some of them in my professional capacity, and I look forward to others who I may not have met personally before, but it's really good to be here on this panel, to be invited to moderate this. It's an interesting point of time in history that we have gathered here together to celebrate the oncoming 250th anniversary of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I'm not an expert on Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and therefore I'm really looking forward to learning more about him from my fellow panelists. But I just wanted to kick off with a few personal reflections on why I have always found him, the figure of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, as someone extremely inspiring and someone who has molded my views as an Indian and as a Bengali. Let me just zoom out of the the historical and look at what's happening right today. I don't know how many of you have seen this on social media today. A really strikingly shallow picture has surfaced of celebrating so-called motherhood of a woman cooking food for her family with an oxygen mask on. Clearly, the woman is ill, but she's cooking for her family, and it apparently celebrates womanhood and motherhood. I think the sheer black and white simplicity, the crassness of this imagery, the ability, the kind of childish imagination that pigeonholes women into this kind of a role of someone who is bound to the kitchen and is cooking food for her family. Though she's clearly in urgent sort of medical crisis, I think shows that how little progress we have made in our minds and in our imaginations from the time when Raja Ram Mohan Roy had started his pioneering movement, I think, across the world in terms of women's empowerment and feeling, the identity of being a woman, being on a par with men. He's been a childhood icon ever since I can remember. I think part of it is because of the sheer power of iconography. The Rembrandt Peale portrait of Raja Ram Mohan Roy is particularly striking. Not many portraits of that kind of vividness and liveliness exist among his contemporaries. So that is quite a powerful portrait that has then been reinforced through history books, even Amar Chitra Katha. So I think that is something that really attracted me to Raja Ram Mohan Roy as a child. Further on, in my own career at the British Council, I was very fortunate to visit Bristol and have seen the Arnosville Cemetery, and I really look forward to Honorable Duda's conversation today. And the statue that dominates the city center of Bristol is that of him. I mean, you see this fantastic statue of Raja Ram Mohan Roy right in front of Bristol Town Hall. And it is quite remarkable that if you recall Black Lives Matter, Bristol was at the center of tumultuous controversy around the statue of Edward Colston, the slave trader. The statue was dismantled and thrown into the sea near Bristol. So I think as an Indian, it gives me great pride to see Raja Ram Mohan Roy's statue commanding the kind of respect in Britain, and his where his final remains rest at Arnosville Cemetery. It's a spectacular structure that was put forward, I think, initially by Dwarkanath Tagore and then restored very recently by contributions from many people in Bengal. I will, so those are my initial kind of reflections. I would like to invite Professor Ranjan Chakraborty, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Vidyasagar University, to put forward his initial remarks. Professor Chakraborty, it was a pleasure to be taught by you. History was my subsidiary subject in Jadavpur. And welcome, sir. It's always a pleasure for a student to introduce his teacher. I can't see you on video though. Can you hear or see me, sir? Yes, sir. If you could put your...
Yes, I can see you.
Yes, we can hear you too. So, Professor Chakraborty, if you could tell us a little bit about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the figure who sort of strides across like a colossus across Indian history and the father of Renaissance.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chakraborty. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the Heritage Committee of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for organizing a program like this on the occasion of the 250th birth anniversary of Ram Mohan Roy. It is also it can be also described as a quarter millennial birth anniversary or sesquicentennial birth anniversary, or it can be described as by using other words as well. So congratulations, the Heritage Committee. And also thank you very much for inviting me to this program, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would prefer to open my talk with a brief story from Ram Mohan's life. He was 37 years old in 1809. He was working for a British civil servant, Digby, Mr. Digby, who served as district magistrate in different districts of the Bengal presidency. And he was serving as a kind of a personal assistant to Mr. Digby to sort out some of his court cases. And this work took Ram Mohan to Bhagalpur, a small town in the Bengal presidency. And that was the first day that Ram Mohan arrived in Bhagalpur. He was traveling in a palanquin, and by chance his road crossed with the collector of the district, Mr. Hamilton. He was not aware that Mr. Hamilton was around, and it was customary at that time for a native to disembark from the palanquin if he ever comes across an European. And the collector was extremely angry. Ram Mohan did not notice. His palanquin passed by and he started shouting. Then Ram Mohan disembarked from the palanquin, talked to the gentleman and apologized very decently and politely. But the collector was extremely unhappy and he continued shouting at him, insulted him, used abusive words. And then Ram Mohan was also very angry. And finally, the collector asked Ram Mohan to walk away. But Ram Mohan did not listen to him. He embarked upon the palanquin again, and then he went away. Immediately after this, Raja Ram Mohan Rai wrote a letter to the Viceroy, Lord Minto. He complained against the collector, and eventually the collector was censored, officially censored. And so this shows why I started with this story. This will speak for the dignified courage and his keen sense of self-respect. This is a special character of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. And this collector was finally officially censored by the Governor General, Lord Minto. So it was a victory. The first encounter of Raja Ram Mohan Rai with the British was a victory. Now today we are here, we have assembled to celebrate the bicentenary of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. Tomorrow is his birthday. He was born on 22nd of May. Interestingly, when the centenary of Ram Mohan Rai's death was celebrated in 1933 by the eminent figures of the Bengal Renaissance, such as Rabindranath Tagore, Brajendranath Sheel, and Ramananda Chattopadhyay, it still seemed possible in the declining twilight of that Renaissance to take a heroic view of history. They thought that they could carry the torch of Renaissance forward. Although the situation was very bad, you will remember, many of you will be able to remember that it was the year of Great Depression. It is precisely the time when the Great Depression hit the entire global economy and the Wall Street crash occurred. But still they were hopeful, and they hoped that Renaissance would continue. Now, in 1972, when the bicentenary of his birth was celebrated in Calcutta and elsewhere, it no longer seemed possible to take such a heroic view of history. Now, 1972 was also a year of crisis. Many of you would remember that it was the decade when the Naxalite movement hit West Bengal and other parts of India, the 1970s. It was also a period of crisis then. And by then, the post-colonial frustration has set in. And you have the young radicals demolishing the statue of Ram Mohan and Vidyasagar at various places. You know, the individuals like Ram Mohan Rai or Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, they are symbols of many things. They are symbols of nationalism, colonialism, decolonization, and also, they also symbolize the aspiration and frustration of an independent nation. And this is partly why they had to face the wrath of the people of India at different points of time. So it was a period of crisis when we celebrated the bicentenary of the birth of Ram Mohan Rai. Today we are going to celebrate this evening the 250th birth anniversary of Ram Mohan Rai. And this time too, we are in the midst of a deep crisis, one of the deepest crises in history, the SARS-CoV-19 pandemic. Now, Ram Mohan Rai, he was the co-founder of Unitarian religion. He was a champion of Reformed Hinduism. He was a great social reformer and the father of the Renaissance. You know all this. Now, the image of the Raja as the father of Indian Renaissance, it has been looked upon as a construct by many historians. Ram Mohan was a great visionary. He was the father of modern India, but the modernity nurtured by the Bengal Renaissance has been questioned by scholars and historians. The very phrase Bengal Renaissance is a contested phrase. And the Marxist historians, as well as the non-Marxist historians like Professor Rajat Kanta Rai, historians like Borun De, R.C. Majumdar, or those who have worked on Raja Ram Mohan Rai, all of them expressed their serious doubts about the validity of the Renaissance. They have raised the question whether it was a Renaissance at all. Now, many of them have described the Bengal Renaissance as a kind of mythography. And they said that this mythography was constructed by men like Kishori Chand Mitro, Pari Chand Mitro, and others who believed in the validity of the Renaissance, and it also transfigured in the philosophical generalizations of Brajendranath Sheel, White, Ram Mohan, The Universal Man, the book published in 1924, and in the spiritualist history of Rabindranath Tagore, White, Bharat Puthik, Ram Mohan, published in 1933, and also some professional historians, including Professor Sushobhan Chandra Sarkar. Now, Ram Mohan respected the traditional philosophy of the East. He was respectful of the Eastern philosophy. He was also open to the Western philosophy. He had a scientific mind, and he had no reservation about Western culture. He wanted to infuse a rational and scientific approach into the Indian society. He believed in social equality and social progress. He was a modern man. He was far ahead of his time, as mentioned earlier by some of the speakers already. But the problem is, why he is facing so much criticism is that the exploitive side of British colonialism escaped his notice. He was a supporter of free trade. He was fond of Adam Smith's economics. He was a great admirer of the book, Wealth of Nations. He believed in free trade. He believed in free entry of European capitalists into the Indian interior. He also advocated that foreign technology and foreign capital should be allowed to settle down and it would lead to the development of the country. Now, the introduction of Western education, we all know that the real thing behind all this was the exposure to Western education. And Western education played the role of a catalyst. As Western education started spreading in colonial India, it also triggered off various types of reactions among the Indian intelligentsia. This reaction was not monolithic, it was diverse in nature. We have responses of the conservatives like Radhakanto Dev or Vidyalankar, who scornfully rejected Western civilization, Western culture, and they preferred to embrace the Indian tradition and Indian religion. This is one response. Then you have the young Bengal response. They uncritically accepted Western culture, Western language. They would go to Kalighat every morning and say, "Good morning, Madam Kali." They started eating beef, and they showed their fondness for Western culture repeatedly. This is another response. But Ram Mohan's response is of a moderate type, and it is balanced. It is far more balanced. And Ram Mohan aptly imbibed the three outstanding ingredients of modernity. You know, from European Enlightenment, from European education, men like Ram Mohan could really pick up the three outstanding ingredients of modernity. What are they? One is reason, second is humanism, and the third is the idea of progress. Now, the message of European Enlightenment infused a new spirit of criticism into the Western educated intelligentsia. And in the minds of the men like Ram Mohan, they developed a new urge to assess European culture and to reassess the various spheres of indigenous tradition and culture, including our religious practices. This led to the social reform movement, the reformation of the Hindu religion, which resulted in Brahmoism, and the abolition of Shoti movement, and also a crusade against the repression of women, which was later followed up by Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. But the point is, you know, where the problem is with Ram Mohan, we have to note this carefully, that all responses to the West were not within the polarized units of tradition and modernity. It's not that Ram Mohan was championing modernity, because he was silent about the British colonial exploitation. He was silent about the sufferings of the peasantry, the riots. He was a supporter of the permanent settlement, which established private right in land. It created landlordism. So this is not a very airtight compartment. Tradition and modernity, both the concepts were very fluid, and the border between tradition and modernity at that point of time was very porous. Even Ram Mohan was very confused. He was in a condition of dilemma. He was in a condition of dichotomy. There was dichotomy in Ram Mohan's position. And the modernity nurtured by the leaders of Bengal Renaissance, including Ram Mohan, they were also suffering from this dichotomy. So in the 18th century society in which the Raja was born, it was very fluid and too complex to be viewed in the light of such a simplistic concept of tradition and modernity. And this modernity has been questioned by many, and the premature, you know, the people who eulogized Raja Ram Mohan Rai as the father of modernity, Indian modernity, like Brajendranath Sheel or Rabindranath Tagore, their gesture was looked upon as a very premature eagerness to find a father figure for modern India in Ram Mohan. Ram Mohan had investments. Ram Mohan had investments in the agency house business. He was a representative of the free traders, He invested his money in Macintosh agency and many other agencies. So Ram Mohan should be treated in the context of his time, and Ram Mohan's dichotomy and his dilemma should be reassessed by the historians. Now, I give you 3 points before I end my initial round of talk. Ram Mohan's career displayed this complex and inconclusive process of modernization. It was modern, but it may not be a modernity in the European sense, where we could see the rise of industries, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of bourgeoisie, and a full-blast capitalist society. And in Ram Mohan's career, we find 3 separate strands. One, the consolidation of the position of the traditional high caste rural gentry on land, landlordism, which gave birth to landlordism and exploitation of peasantry. And number 2, the transformation of a medieval literati into a Western educated intelligentsia. Number 3, the transition from company monopoly to free trade imperialism, which was ultimately to lead to the failure of Indian capitalist enterprise after its brief development in partnership with the European free traders. Look at Ram Mohan's lifetime. When Ram Mohan was born, India was still anchored to medieval commerce. India was then selling its cotton to the wider world and bringing in a large quantity of silver. It was during his lifetime that the traffic changed into colonial trade. From cotton for export and silver for import, the Indians had to turn to raw materials. India became a raw material producing society by and large, and it was importing a large amount of textile, British finished textile, machine-made textile product. There is a contradiction in the modernity nurtured by the protagonists of the Bengal Renaissance, of which Ram Mohan was the father figure. It was precisely during his lifetime that India went through an economic transformation. But the transformation may not speak of modernity. It was the transformation from a feudal economy to a semi-feudal and colonial one. Finally, I'll conclude by saying, in spite of the limitations imposed by circumstances on his achievement, it will be a one-sided view that fails to take note of his personal greatness. He was a great man. The sweeping clarity of his thought, the striking modernity of his philosophical premises and social vision, the concrete achievements of his fruitful career in Calcutta that led to the emergence of a modern urban culture containing the seeds of future Indian nationalism. Until the coming of Rabindranath Tagore, there is no comparable figure of greatness produced by Bengal, whose life work might be regarded as having the same immediacy of impact in the maturing of the modern age in India. You see, with this I conclude, you see, when the Indian intelligentsia responded to British colonialism, in many of them, we find a kind of an inferiority complex. But three outstanding individuals were completely free from this inferiority complex when they came into contact with the West. Who are they? One is Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. The second person is Swami Vivekananda. And the third person is Rabindranath Tagore. And although these three persons are completely free from this inferiority complex or hesitation or dichotomy, we have another man before them. If there is anyone before them, before Vidyasagar, that is Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who was also by and large free from this inferiority complex. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranjanda. I think it was a real historical tour de force that you took us through, and also teasing out the nuances of some of the labels and words that we use in layperson's context. And it was really fascinating to hear about the conditional framework within which, and the historical framework within which Ram Mohan's ideas and thoughts should be viewed. I will now come to Dr. Aniruddha Channal. Aniruddha, I think we will be playing a short clip from your film before I put my first question to you. Is someone from the Bengal Chamber ready to play the clip?
Yes, we will just start.
Who would have thought that the Bristol pilgrimage would bring me to Edinburgh? Ever since I saw the replica death mask in Calcutta, I wanted to see the original. Carla had established the fact that it had ended up in Edinburgh, possibly at the medical school. When I called around all the likely places, no one had heard of Ram Mohan Rai or his death mask. It was the modern marvel of the internet that finally came to my aid. By doing various searches with Ram Mohan and death mask, I was finally able to locate a site that was selling replica death masks for £250 to £450, literally per head. Amazingly enough, a replica of Ram Mohan Roy's death mask was also on this online catalogue. The site, belonging to the William Ramsay Henderson Trust, named Professor Matthew Kaufman as its contact. After several attempts, on the 27th of April 2004, an email from Professor Kaufman, University of Edinburgh Medical School, confirmed that the death mask was indeed in their possession, but on permanent loan to a storage facility of the Scottish National Portrait Gallery in Granton. An email from its custodians confirmed that the original death mask with the reference number and Rai, spelled Punjabi style with an I, was at the Granton facility. It took 6 months of negotiations via email and phone calls to secure the permission to see and film the mask, not in public view since 1886. Next morning, I arrived early in the desolate area near the waterfront. The impressively named Granton Art Centre was in fact only a storage facility. There are no exhibitions and it is not open to the public. As I wondered where I could get some coffee, my main contact person arrived.
Yes, you can.
Alan Barkis, a former policeman with a soft corner for the arts, looks after this facility. He was the person who 6 months ago had confirmed for me on the phone that the original plaster cast was indeed there. He had made the special visit on a Saturday with his wife when the facility was closed, just to help me out.
This death mask is not normally on display. I don't know if Anne will explain that to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Alan had taken the trouble to bring out the mask from the shelves to put it on display for filming from different angles. Finally, there it was, an exact image in 3 dimensions of this giant of the Indian Renaissance, within hours of his death 171 years ago. Even if photography had been invented by then, there would be no way to get such a complete picture of the Raja's appearance, but for this simple measure that belied the remarkable foresight of Dr. Eslin. It became apparent that the Calcutta mask was not a replica after all. The original showed somewhat smaller and asymmetric ears. It also seemed smaller in size, normal for a Bengali gentleman about 6 feet tall today, but perhaps big in volume for the period as reported in contemporary accounts. It seemed somewhat elongated from the side, as castes from the front and the back seemed to be imperfectly joined together. The study of the shape and protuberances of the head, called phrenology, was popular in Scotland at the time. It was believed to reveal character and mental capacity. The Raja's head was charted and studied in great detail, very likely by noted phrenologists Gall and Combe, themselves immortalized by their own death masks. His head was believed to reveal traits of firmness, conscientiousness, self-esteem, and love of approbation. The last quality was believed to explain his chief flaw, which was his inability to say no, an Asian trait of acquiescence that sometimes put him in an awkward corner. Even there, Land Carpenter rose vehemently to his defense, explaining that that was part of his indulgent Eastern etiquette, and that no man stood more firmly in the face of adversity than the Raja when the situation truly demanded it. The phrenologists also found traits of secretiveness, combativeness, benevolence, and pessimism in him that they sought to reconcile with his life, and the attempt seems at once quaint and interesting, if not entertaining. His lack of veneration and wonder was believed to be the reason why he placed so little stock in the tales of miracle of any faith, and valued logical thinking above all else. Even though phrenology is now discredited as a science, the death mask of Ram Mohan, commissioned by his friends, belies the esteem they had for him and his deeds. The company he keeps in this extraordinary shrine speaks for itself. Samuel Johnson, Jonathan Swift, William Wordsworth, Walter Scott, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Franz Joseph Haydn, Isaac Newton, as well as his friends in his mortal life, Jeremy Bentham, with whom he corresponded extensively, and William Roscoe. The anguish of the last breath drawn, sometimes still written on their faces. The Raja, by contrast, looks peaceful and recognizable from the Pyrenees Briggs portrait. The Peel portrait, showing a stout face, however, seems a poor likeness, unless it was commenced at a time when the Raja had put on weight, as reported by the Sanskrit scholar Wilson. Dr. Estlin did not record a rapid weight loss during his last illness. From the Edinburgh Castle that evening, while enjoying a panoramic view of the waterfront, called the Firth of Forth, where Granton is located, I bade goodbye to the death mask in its abode of quiet Scottish hospitality for nearly 2 centuries.
That was really touching, but can I just make one really stern comment to viewers who have tuned in? Please stop vandalizing the proceedings. What someone did by scribbling on that screen is just unacceptable. It's my request to the organizers to please take him off this live telecast immediately. Please do that. This cannot be repeated. This is absolutely unacceptable.
Absolutely, we are trying to find out the source.
To one of the greatest Indians who ever lived. I'm absolutely exasperated. I have no words of condemnation. My apologies. I'm really, really upset at what was clearly an attempt to sort of disfigure the proceedings and just the worst of what we are facing in India as a nation at this moment. Please stop doing these things. Honorable Dada, really sorry for my outburst. Let's talk about Raja Ram Mohan's impact on the West and his vision of Indian independence.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Devanjan, and I totally understand your outburst. I was quite astonished to see what was going on there. Thought at first it was possibly inadvertent, but it seemed later on to be quite deliberate. And just allow me to have a sip of coffee to just regain my composure. What I wanted to say is largely encapsulated in the video clip you saw, And hopefully, Debanjan, you'll be able to share the link, not only to that clip, but to the entire film. And I think it'll be a lot nicer to see without those scribblings.
Yes, that's exactly what we plan to do, Aniruddha.
Thank you so much. It became a painstaking sort of Georgian whodunit mission. And as I was posted in England at the time by my employer, and I had read that Ram Mohan Rai had died in Bristol. And that was about 80 miles from where I lived in Bracknell, which is England's Silicon Valley. And so I started to make trips. After my first trip, I got quite obsessed with it because every time I visited, it reaped a bumper crop of stories, almost forgotten or never seriously looked into, as well as a collection of portraits and likenesses of people associated with the Raja that brings his final days to life, such as his friend, the Unitarian minister, Land Carpenter, who had invited him to Bristol, John Bishop Estlin, who looked after him in his last and fatal illness, and whose diary helped the Calcutta neurosurgeon Ripin Bhomik determine the cause of the Raja's death. And Mary Carpenter, the daughter of Land, who recorded various details of Raja's stay in England, Catherine Castle, a wealthy heiress, who, along with her aunt Anne Kidell, was the hostess of the Raja in Stapleton Grove, where he died and was initially buried before being exhumed 10 years later by Darkanath Tagore and reinterred in the Honours Vale Cemetery. The relationship between India and Britain has for too long been viewed through the prism of the colonial encounter and the bruises that it left behind. And there's much written about it by Shashi Tharoor and others. I hardly need to go into that. But there is another side to this story, one of individuals, both Indian and British, who made something constructive out of the coming together of these two cultures, that it might be fair to say forever changed both nations. In many ways, this started with the Raja and his European friends. So my documentary reflects on the veneration that his British friends felt for the Raja, in sharp contrast with the condescension that might have been expected toward a visitor from a vassal state. As you saw, his death mask, which was commissioned by Dr. Estlin, because of course this was before photography, had been invented. But in some ways, we get a three-dimensional representation of his appearance that even a photograph would not have captured. And this was reserved for celebrities and people that were held in very high esteem. And if you see that clip again, not being distracted by those scribblings, you'll see the point I'm making is that he's kept there with the greatest of the greats of British history, such as Sir Isaac Newton, and others, enumerated in the documentary. I won't take up time to repeat what's in the film. It's interesting to see, and in the people who studied his death mask, these were phrenologists, and of course, phrenology is now discredited as a science. But what's interesting is that they held him in such esteem that they felt it necessary to study how such a man was born in India. Of course, they had started to develop a great deal of condescension and disdain for the general Indian populace. And there are many comments in that report that I have read in detail, of which there is some allusion, or there are some allusions in the film, but not all. But they keep saying that, we're astonished that a man who can be compared with the greatest Europeans of our times was born amongst Hindus that have such, backward and benighted traditions. So that way he was viewed as almost a godlike being. And so Ram Mohan interacted very positively with the British at the time. And, maybe there could be some criticism of that, of late there has been, and I'll address that in a moment. But why he was held in such esteem and interacted so well with the British to improve the condition of his lot, and fought for such things as the abolition of sati and various land rights, etc., that we're all aware of. He was also the first visionary to have envisaged Indian independence, and this is something that's probably not that well known. But I will quote something that in Stephen Hayes's treatise on prominent 19th century Indians, there is this quote from Raja Ram Mohan Roy, where he says, "It should not be lost sight of that the position of India is very different from that of Ireland, to any quarter of which an English fleet may suddenly convey a body of troops that may force its way in the requisite direction and succeed in suppressing any effort of a refractory spirit. Were India to share 1/4 of the knowledge and energy of that country, i.e. Ireland, she would prove from her remote situation, her riches, and her vast population either useful and profitable as a willing province, an ally of the British Empire, or troublesome and annoying as a determined enemy." So that says it all. So people who think he was pro-British, etc., are very shallow. They do not understand the depth and breadth of his thinking. At the time, it is true that both he and Rabindranath Tagore, by the way, Rabindranath, a much misunderstood man, I have also a documentary on him on YouTube that you might consider looking at. With due respect, I beg to differ with Professor Chakraborty, who spoke before me, in terms of tradition and modernity, points about Ram Mohan Roy being confused, etc. I think those are overstatements, because it is very difficult for people to see what's wrong with their society while living in it. Many people saw sati every day, Brahmins like Ram Mohan, but it took Ram Mohan to stand up against it and fight his own kind, even his own mother, who took him to court, etc., as it's well known. So within that context, everybody has to be judged within the mores of their times. And we don't know what future generations will berate us for. Maybe for eating meat or having other animals as pets, or frivolous expenses on gadgets and vacations and so on, while there is widespread starvation and suffering. So every person must be judged within the context of their times. We can't say Shakespeare was anti-Semitic because he portrayed a character like Shylock. 400 years later, those sorts of comments can trip very easily off our tongues. But if you were living then, like Ram Mohan was living in the 1800s, he was right to see the British as a force for good, because we were burning our widows while they were preaching a religion of love and tolerance and equality. So he was absolutely right at the time to work with the British rulers to have this evil practice eradicated. Now, we can sit today in 2021 and nitpick with, where he might have been a little too pro-British or in favor of Western education versus Sanskrit education that might have perpetuated the benighted nature of our society. So he was working, he and Rabindranath were both working within the context of their times. And before 1857, before imperial arrogance set in, positive things were being done by Indians and British people collaborating. The Asiatic Society was being formed. The first multinational corporation, Karan Tagore, was established. So we have to see it in that context. And back then, they did not have the data. Neither Ram Mohan nor Dwarkanath had the data to know that there would never be equality before the British. That started to become apparent much later. And obviously, the independence movement started. But it's not so well known that while Ram Mohan was engaging constructively with the British, he also saw, as is evident from the quote I just gave you, that this could go off the rails and become a problem. And in that situation, the British would find themselves at a disadvantage. As he says, that, you can work with us and we would be a willing and friendly ally, or we could become a very determined enemy. The same sort of thing happened in the American War of Independence. Prior to that, Benjamin Franklin envisioned a United States of Europe and alliance between Britain and America, until he was severely humiliated during a court case and he turned against the British Empire. So Ram Mohan and Dwarkanath saw a future with British rule that seemed positive to him. And Blair King, who was one of the greatest experts on Dwarkanath Tagore and Ram Mohan, in his book about Dwarkanath Tagore, calls him partner in empire. There's a reason why he chose that title. These men, at the time, saw the British as a positive force, as a liberating force. And, it's well known, and, I might make myself a bit unpopular by saying this, but at the end of the Battle of Plassey, if you read William Dalrymple's book, Anarchy, people heaved a sigh of relief when the reign of Siraj-ud-Dowlah, who was an absolute debauch, ended. And at the time, the East India Company seemed to be a little bit better in comparison. So, these are, of course, complex topics to get into. But I would say that I would disagree that Indians were in a hurry to find a hero. And so they extolled Ram Mohan Roy into a father of modern India, and no renaissance ever happened. These are just, undeserved bits of cynicism, in my opinion. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox. That's all I wanted to say. I don't want to go on, but I would once again urge you to, side by side, see, not side by side, but one after the other, see my documentaries on Ram Mohan Roy as well as Dwarkanath Tagore. I think I was very fortunate to be able to discover many long forgotten things about these men. As you saw, the death mask, that's not so well known. People know very well about Ram Mohan's campaign to start newspapers and abolish sati and so forth. But what happened to him after he went to England and died 2 years, 3 years after that, that has been shrouded in mystery or sort of, not that much awareness. And I was fortunate to be able to dig up some stories relating to that. So I would, as the expression goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think motion picture is worth even more. So I'd urge everybody to see the documentaries and
Thank you.
Your comments.
Thank you so much, Aniruddha. And I'm really delighted that we are not converging. We are agreeing to disagree. I think that is something that Ram Mohan would have been himself very proud of, I think. So look forward to an exchange between you and Ranjanda a short while from now. And I think as you were talking about, especially that clip that we saw about phrenology, I was reminded of, Sherlock Holmes. Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes is very interested in phrenology, if you remember from more popular fiction. And it was very good to see references to some of my colleagues in Scotland being referred to in your documentary. So I really look forward to watching the documentary in full, as well as the one on Dwarkanath, because we are working quite closely with many colleagues and friends in the UK who are working to preserve Bengali history and heritage in the UK. So we will have further conversations. Now I come to Rupa Mojumdar. Rupa, I think you wanted to speak about one facet of Raja Ram Mohan, which is, I think Aniruddha has kind of laid the foundations for it. Him as an author, as someone who extensively published in several languages in his lifetime, and almost as the first public intellectual of India who was trying to canvass public opinion both here in India as well as in the UK about the causes he believed in, about the ideas he so passionately championed. So tell us a little bit about that. You're one of Kolkata's leading lights in publishing, and you wanted to speak about that, but also feel free to bring in your perspective as a woman on this great man that we are remembering today.
Thank you, Mr. Debajan Chakraborty. To begin with, allow me to quote a very small portion of Raja Rammohun Roy's passionate appeal on behalf of women. The quote, "You are accusing a woman of being inferior, but you have denied to them the excellent merits that are entitled to, and you charge them that they are naturally incapable of acquiring those merits. You accuse a woman that they lack understanding, but you keep them void of education. Then how can you in justice pronounce of their inferiority? When name of death shudders a man, a female from her firmness of mind offers to burn with the corpse of her deceased husband, and yet you accuse these women of deficiency in point of resolution. Isn't this exceedingly surprising?" Well, Raja Rammohun Roy, I think, was the first missionary in modern India who had thought so passionately about women, women's rights, and had commendable courage to voice his thoughts. His thinkings are still relevant because, Mr. Chakraborty, while you began this discussion, you just told us the example of a woman in the kitchen with the oxygen and everything. So we are still struggling to establish our rights, even after 250 years. So I think being a woman, all the women folk of India should pay gratitude, should owe gratitude to Raja Rammohun Roy for our present day scenario, for our present day status in the society. And the best way of paying tribute to this great man is to remember his life, his activities, to follow his deeds, and to complete his unfinished work. So while celebrating 250th birth anniversary of Raja Rammohun Roy, we have to keep this in mind and try to fulfill history. Now, on a personal note, let me allow me to just share one more thing. That is, my residence is in Jhamapukur Lane, just a little off to Raja Rammohun Roy Sharoni. My residence is adjacent to Raja Rammohun Roy College. My postal address is, the post office name is Raja Rammohun Roy Post Office. And I am attached to such a profession where I get a bulk order from Raja Rammohun Roy Foundation, and I am a member of Advisory Committee of Raja Rammohun Roy Library. So I'm elated that at least every day I have to utter the name of Raja Rammohun Roy. I think it's like uttering the name of a god to a woman. Now, let's come to the topic of discussion today. And I'll speak on the Raja Rammohun Roy's role in publishing because I am very much connected to publishing industry and it is relevant to my work also. Let me elaborate something on Indian writing in English. Rammohun Roy acquired proficiency in a large number of languages, in Sanskrit, in Arabic, in Persian, in Urdu, in Hindi, in Hebrew, in Greek, in Latin, in English, in French, and his mother tongue, Bengali. He is noted for being the first Indian to write directly in English to the Governor General Lord Minto in 1809, and in doing so, he introduced a new literary genre, Indian writing in English. His writing was so bold, both in content and style, that it announced to the British ruling class in India that he possessed a comment over the very language that was the language of their command. Isn't this very interesting? The native had not set his foot in English soil till then, but yet he had mastered the language of command and had to keep to the treasure of knowledge acquired by the West. In 1816, he published a short translation of the Hindu sacred book, the Vedanta, and followed it up with two Sanskrit Upanishads in English. He continued to produce 2 to 3 trades every year, and in 1823, he wrote 9 English works covering several critical issues, starting from spreading the English education to criticizing the practice of sati and raising his voice against the press regulations. In 1820, he startled his friends and enemies by publishing a book with the title, The Precepts of Jesus, The Guide to Peace and Happiness. It was a collection of all the morals and spiritual precepts of Jesus without the narrations of the miracles. He drew hostile criticism from the Baptist missionaries and gave rise to controversy, which finally turned upon the doctrine of Trinity, and Rammohn Roy successively published 3 appeals to the Christian public up to 1823. It was evident from his publications that he had not confined himself to Bible only. He had acquired Hebrew, Greek, in order to refer to the originals. Now, let me elaborate something about the languages he mastered. Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit, obviously. Rammohn Roy picked up the Sanskrit at the age of 14 from a local Brahmin scholar, Nanda Kumar Vidyalankar, and mastered the language on his own. He familiarized himself with the Persian in the same way without traveling to Persia. He had a flair for languages which helped him to pick Arabic without formal tuition at the Patna Madrasa. And just at the age of 30, he wrote a book on religion titled Tahfat-ul-Muhauddin. He even published a magazine, Persian journal magazine, Miratul Akbar. So this is just surprising, a Bengali man publishing a magazine in Persian language. Though he was a master of Sanskrit, he realized that Sanskrit system of education will keep his countrymen in darkness only, and so promoted English as the medium of education. Now, let me elaborate a little bit on popularizing the Bengali prose. Rabindranath Tagore, on the occasion of birth centenary of Raja Rammohn Roy, rightly mentioned that Raja Rammohn Roy has placed Bengali literature on the granite foundation. He introduced a new vigor and richness into the Bengali prose. His prose was marked by clarity, coherence, reasoning, and structural strength. Between 1815 and 1829, he published 30 Bengali books and even wrote one of the grammar books in Bengali. Rammohn Roy always made it a point to communicate useful knowledge to the people of Bengal through the columns of his Bengali newspaper, Sangbad Kaumudi. Sangbad Kaumudi started his journey in 1821. He also had another journal. It is called Brahmikal Magazine. So Bengali literature was so vastly improved by his careful cultivation, by his taste, by his genius, that it became the medium of communication of Western knowledge and then civilized Bengali society. So, Raja Rammohn Roy was a public intellectual in true sense. He crossed different cultures and civilizations with ease of a born internationalist. He was close to the rich and influential men of Bengal at that time, and at the same time, he was close to the number of dignitaries in the Western world. He publicly welcomed the liberation of Spanish colonies of South America from the tyranny of Spain. He rejoiced in the victory of Liberal Party in the Portuguese Civil War. He wished success to the Greek struggle for independence from Turkish rule. He admired the ideals of French Revolution and supported the revolution and supported the reform agitation in England. And his love for liberty was so intense that he gave a public dinner in Town Hall of Calcutta as a mark of his joy at the establishment of constitutional government in Spain. So, to conclude, Rabindranath Tagore described Raja Rammohun Roy as the inaugurator of modern age in India. It's very true, because he was the man who spoke the language of plurality and secularism and the principles of multiculturalism. He spoke against idolatry, superstition, and obviously he lashed out against the subjugation of women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Rupa Majumdar, for throwing some light on the other side of Rammohun's personality and life. I think his eclecticism, his internationalism, something that we would call global citizenship in the 21st century, and his command and mastery of so many languages is just remarkable. And we often forget that he came to English language rather late in life. I mean, I think he was in his late 20s, early 30s when he started learning English. And in education circle debates, I often say that the case for English language education is over-egged in India. People learn English if you teach them well using the right methodology. And I think Rammohun Roy was a living example of how you learn a number of languages if you have the right learning education conditions. And I'm really, really glad that you touched upon his this aspect of being an advocate and a messenger for a whole range of ideas. I didn't know about his great support for international freedom movements and right to self-determination, if not full-fledged democracy, and within the context of his time. May I now come to Mr. Shomesh Dasgupta. Welcome, sir. I think you wanted to speak about Rammohun Roy as a social reformer and his role in being a harbinger of sorts of industrial revolution in India, from your perspective as one of the leading lights in the energy sector in India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chakrabarti. I may not be a very suitable speaker for today's discussion because I'm neither a historian nor educationist. I'm a hardcore man from the industry. But when Bengal Chamber invited me to be part of the particular discussion, when I'm going through in their content, there are 2-3 things which attract me. And I thought that I may be a useful person to do some justice with that. Number one was, it's organized by Heritage Committee. So Heritage, when I observed that the program is conducted by Heritage Committee, I am also representing an organization more than 102 years old. I'm a director of a company which is called India Power Corporation. Once upon a time, it's called Vishagar Power Supply Company. It was in 1990 established. So I thought that there is a correlation with the Heritage Committee, Raja Rammohun Roy, Said Patience, and also my existence in a whole organization. Second part, when I'm going through that particular theme of the particular discussion, making of New India by the visionary Raja Rammohun Roy. One thing immediately stuck to my mind, that making of New India means, making of anything means reform. So I was very convinced that yes, there are a lot of reform taking place in power sector, in the industrial revolution. And when somebody wants to say something about reform and leading to the new making of New India, indirectly, the visionary Raja Rammohun comes into the picture. So then I thought, no, it's possible for me to do some justice, some significant contribution during this discussion. That's the reason today I will just share something to you that is basically a history of a reform in power sector in a small way. See, power sector is a very interesting sector. Power sector is not like a manufacturing sector, is a FMCG. It's not that. It's a very conservative, very robust, and historically very sound sector. 99% of private company in India who are in power sector, they are more than 100 years existence. All the state board also, they are more than 50, 60 years in operations. So we are calling it in one way, it is very, very conservative sector we are called power sector. Now I am audible. Hello.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
We can hear you, sir. Please.
Yeah. So for the purpose, so I was thinking that as heritage part is an integral thing with the power sector, I should say something about power reform. See, in power reform in India, which is a very important thing for making new India, is guided by an Electricity Act, which is called Electricity Act 2003. So in Electricity Act 2003, the entire power sector reform in generation sectors and distribution sectors, the one mantra of the reform was the competitive environment. So the competitive environment is the only mantra in the Electricity Act 2003, which ultimately prosper India in a different stage. And for that purpose, what is the competitive environment? If we talk about the distribution of power, which is the main thing to be reformed, we require multiple license presence. When you are talking about multiple license presence, it is called the competitiveness. So my point of talking to you, that is competitiveness, which you're talking about the reform, it is done in long ways. More than 100 years back, we have established that. India has already initiated the process long back. Right now, we are only enjoying the concept of that initiative. It means, come to our organizations. We are an organization called India Power or Disregard Power Supply Company. We this established in 1919 in the area called Durgapur Asansol Belt. It was a British company. It was formed basically to supply power in coal mining, Bengal coal, which is the Asia's largest coal mining operation at that time, and all the industry there. From 1990, it was operating there as a single licensee. Then in 1932, we got our proper licensee to supply power in the area. Then in 1948, DVC formed. So our government that time has given a license to a second company for welcoming them to operate in a competitive environment. So from 1948 onwards, DVC was operating in this particular area. Again in 1954-55, when the state government decided that they should distribute power all over the state, they have given license to WSEB, which is state board company, to supply power in Asansol Raniganj belt also, knowing very well there are two companies existing. So it means the reform was very stable process there. We never thought twice that why the three people are there to supply power. Because at that time, no question of reform, no question of Electricity Act. People was no idea for the this type of reform concept that time. But people allowed to operate independently. So as on today is an example in India that in one area where three company, DVC, WBSEB, and India Power Corporations are working. And that is an excellent way that sometimes they're playing the role of the competitions, sometimes they are collaborations, competitions, everything together, and which ultimately helps the consumer, whether it is an industrial consumer or it is a domestic consumer, to get three things: quality of power, affordable power, and reliable power. So the purpose of today's Making New India is three things: your industry people, your operations people, your domestic consumer, they should get quality power, they should get affordable power, and they should get reliable power. That is only possible by creating a competition. And this competition will bring down the cost. This competition will give up, will boost up your quality and 24/7 reliable power. So why I'm sharing this thing to you? Because this heritage organization, like you're talking about other company also in power sector, the competitions which you are talking about, it is not today's mantra. It is the mantra for the long time. In 1990, when the company was operated and working for more than 100 years, the main motto was competitions, competitions, and competitions. So I was thinking when I got the offer from Bengal Chamber to share that in the heritage interaction today, that this reform in power sector is very, very important today. In India, we're heading to the industrialization, industrial evolution, and evolution will never happen unless you have a proper reform in power sector. And proper reform power sector is only possible by creating a competitive environment, whether in generating sector or distribution sector. And the competition, which already existing in our present system, being initiated by our leaders that time, by our predecessor. So thanks to these all wise men who are there and who push that competition is the only thing in the power sector which brings down and which create a culture that power can be the commodity. Power can be the commodity, not as a service. So with that idea, I was thinking to share something with you. I am very happy that it's possible for me to share this knowledge in a platform where we are celebrating Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I think that as a power company, as a heritage power company, we will try to do a lot of meaningful things for future where really we can do justice with the vision of the Raja Ram Mohan Roy and make it reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shomeshda, for drawing a parallel between need for reform in the power sector and the reforms that Raja Ram Mohan Roy initiated. I'll come to Shati Bhattacharya next. Shati is my former colleague in the ABP group, and it's always a pleasure to listen to Shati. Shati, I can't see you on my screen though. Shati, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
So good to see you, Shati. Hi. So without further ado, I wonder if you would like to comment on one of the aspects that I think Raja Ram Mohan Roy is duly celebrated across the world, his work in women's reform and enlightenment. And I think he was far ahead of his time by many reckoning.
Yeah.
Yes,
thank you. So, with most people for whose birth centenaries and 200 late, the question always becomes, are they relevant to the contemporary times? But with Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the question is that have we caught up with that man? Because such a man was he that, his ideas, when we look at today and we look around us in this 21st century, that we see that we still have a lot of catching up to do. So why do I say that? Let me be very precise. Last year only, 11th August 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that women have a natural right, a birthright to the property of the family, even when it is a joint family. Now, this may come to us as a surprise because it was in 1832 that Raja Ram Mohan Roy was arguing that women have a natural right to property. What happens is then, how is it that even in 2020, the state has not, the society has not caught up with the fact that women, that is to say girl children, have an equal right to the resources of the family. So what was happening in 2020? The Supreme Court was ruling in a case which said that no matter whether a person is deceased, whether the father is deceased before 2005 or after 2000, before 2005, or the girl was born after 2005, the property was still hers. Why 2005? Because in 2005, the law of inheritance was amended to say that even in joint family, women have the right to property. And because in 1956, the law that was passed finally on women's right to property said that girls have a right to their father's property, and it did not perhaps explicitly mention joint family property. So for the next almost 50 years, people from all over India in every kind of court had contested whether girl children really have any right over their fathers and the families, joint families' property. So 1956, 2005, 2020, the same question of women's right to their resources is being debated over and over again. Let us go a little way back to 1943. And this was the time when in the Constituent Legislative Assembly, it was still a Constituent Assembly, India had still not gained independence. So in that assembly, a handful of women were arguing that women have a right to property. Among them was Renuka Roy, who was a girl from Bengal, a Gandhian by conviction and a follower of Gandhi from a very early age. So against her, on the opposite side, were very eminent Pandits who were quoting Shastras to say that women cannot claim a right to property. Now remember, this is 1943, and women had already gained the right to vote, and they had participated in a movement so that women's age of marriage had been pushed up to 15. And even then, they were being said that they have no right to their property. So the arguments that were being given at that point there were mainly two. One was that the Hindu women do not have the right to perform the funeral rites, the shraddha, the last rites of the parents, and therefore they cannot have the property. And also that women after marriage, they have a right to their in-laws' property, and therefore they cannot claim their father's property. When Renuka Roy was arguing against this, what was that document which was her basis of arguing for women's property? And that was brief remarks regarding the ancient rights of females, which Raja Ram Mohan Roy had written. So you can see how directly Ram Mohan is connected to the absolutely basic foundation of women's empowerment, because women's equality means nothing unless you have the resource to make that equality tangible, practicable. I mean, equality is not an idea. Equality is a practice. And in order to practice it, you need resources. And that's something which Ram Mohan had actually made very clear. Now, I know that many of you might be talking about women's right to property when I'm talking about Ram Mohan and women, because Ram Mohan is most remembered in the context of sati, abolition of the custom of sati. And he is also remembered for his staunch opposition to polygamy, both of which we know led to the further reforms in society. But this is what we sometimes miss. And I think that it is very important that on this 250th birth anniversary, as the celebrations start, this is what we should have in mind. Sati had happened. Why had Sati was happening in Bengal and not so much in the northern states of India? It's not as if Bengalis are more cruel. It is because in Bengal we had the Daya Bhaga system of inheritance, where the widow actually has unconditional right to the husband's property. And therefore, if you needed to, deprive the woman, you actually had to get rid of her. And what better way of getting rid of a woman than burning her directly at her husband's pyre before she even has the scope of, widowhood. You don't even actually allow her to become a widow. You burn her as a sati. And Ram Mohan made this connection. And we have to ask ourselves that why is it that in all these later years, we have looked at sati more as a law and order problem, more as a problem of human rights. Of course, it is all of those problems. Of course, it's the most inhuman thing that one can think of. But remember that at the basis of this, Ram was making this connection, that because this was necessary in Bengal, because we needed to deprive the woman from her right to property. And even with Collins, even with polygamy, he says that how does one get more property from the ancestral property? How does one get more share of it? If one has more sons, how does one have more sons? If one can have multiple wives and have more procreation, but does not need to provide the wife. Because you don't need to give any share of the property to the wife, that is why you can use a woman just for the sake of procreation for more and more sons. So both these issues of polygamy and of sati, at the basis of it all was his idea of, the idea of property, idea of equal access to resources. Having said that, if you read Ram Mohan, we also find that Ram Mohan had, it is astounding that at that time in the 1820s, before almost at a time when, the Unitarian movement, the liberal movement he predates many of the Western feminists, when he had this completely feminist idea that naturally men and women are equal in intellect, in trustworthiness, in the strength of character. So and this also derives from his religiosity, about which many of my previous speakers have spoken, of his religious belief of oneness before God. So we are all God's children, and we have all been created equal. This very liberal idea also actually struck at the root of gender discrimination, and one can see how deeply Ram Mohan was already arguing of giving women equality of opportunity. As I think someone was quoting right before me, that unless you give women the education and all the scope of expressing herself, then how can you say that she is not equal? So this is where, I'll just end with one thing that has come to my mind, that as we know, the eminent professor at the beginning of this discussion was saying that whether Ram Mohan was the father of Bengal Renaissance, as is usually called, this is much debated. And I was thinking that even if one doesn't call him the father of Renaissance, the father of modern India, Ram Mohan could come today, stand before us and give that famous dialogue from the film Diwar, saying that Rishte mein to hum tumhara baap lagte. I am superior to you. I tower over you. You have got a lot of catching up to do, young men and women of 21st century India. I would like to end with a more serious note. We are starting the celebration of the 250th year. And I'm extremely grateful that Bengal Chambers, which itself is a heritage institution, has taken the initiative to do this. Now, webinars are all very good and garlanding statues are all very good. But the real thing is to be the change that they wanted to see. It is upon us to create a society which Ram Mohan Roy had wanted to see, and we still don't have it. So I hope that Bengal Chamber and other institutions like this will take the lead in actually looking at enumerating and publishing, documenting what is currently the situation of women's access to resources, both resources in family, also resources in banks, in finance markets, access to natural resources. What part do we actually have? Are we equal? I mean, I don't believe in being half the sky. I want half the land. I want half the house. I want half of all bank loans. I want to own half of all companies, and I want to be half of all boards of companies and half of all parliaments. Let us see where we stand. In order to do that, we need an assessment. And I do hope that Bengal Chamber will take a lead in that because it has remarkable women among its ranks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shatidi. Really inspirational. And may I add that we should also demand of Bengal Chamber that its panels be almost always from this point onwards be half women. Thank you. I mean, it's really, really remarkable. And I think the point that resonated with me, I think, again, in contemporary times is, as COVID rages across India and children light funeral pyres, how many women are also lighting the pyres of the parents, lighting the fire on the pyres of the parents. So, incredibly difficult days and a moment to reflect on those kind of rights that this man had fought for us. Professor Banerjee, with your permission, can I just bring in Professor Chakraborty for a couple of minutes only, because I think Professor Chakraborty has to leave and wants to comment on Ruddhuda and other panelists' comments. Professor Banerjee, with your kind permission, may I bring Professor Chakraborty in for a minute? Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. Ranjanda, over to you. I think
Thank you.
If you just in a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes. Yes.
Just a brief note of clarification. I am one of the greatest admirers of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. This is a clarification for Mr. Sanyal, who thought that I am against Ram Mohan Rai. If you have heard my talk carefully, you will find that I only wanted to present the historiography of Raja Ram Mohan Rai, how the leading historians have portrayed him. Both the historians from both groups, from the left as well as from the right, they have raised this question, but this question is not specifically addressed to Raja Ram Mohan Rai's contribution, but it is more addressed to the cultural fabric of the Bengal Renaissance as a whole. They have raised their voice because even after 250 years after Ram Mohan Rai, why women are suffering so much? Even after 200 years of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, whose life was like a crusade against this women's repression, why our women are suffering even today. And you see supporting a football team like Mohan Bagan or East Bengal, a lot of passion goes into it. When you support a particular team, that is your personal choice. I have no personal choice as a historian. I was trying to present before you a dispassionate account of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. I was trying to tell you that you see, this man, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, has come to all of us through an emotion-laden lens of nationalism, colonialism, Marxism, post-colonial frustration, and also maybe Bengali sub-nationalism. We have to understand how Ram Mohan has been assessed and reassessed at different points of time. Even the later protagonists of the Renaissance, they saw Ram Mohan differently. If you read Rabindranath Tagore, you find a different tone. You find a different assessment of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. Certainly, yes, he was much ahead of his time. I have never encountered in history a more modern man than Raja Ram Mohan Rai. All said, the problem is we should try, as Shati Bhattacharya said a short while ago. She was also my student at Jadavpur. I may be wrong, but her face is very familiar. She said very rightly that we have to think that why such persons should be criticized. They should be always uncritically accepted. But it is the duty of a historian, it is the duty of any society to continuously assess and reassess according to time. So this is my humble submission before you. Don't think that I am a villain. I am critical of Ram Mohan Rai. As a historian, it was my duty to present before you a dispassionate picture of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. I'm a great admirer. Yeah. And I wish I could sit, Devanjan, I wish I could sit through, but you see, I have to take some medicines. I'm so sorry. It will be my loss, not yours. Thank you all. And namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, and namaskar to you too. I think we will come back to that. Anuruddha, just hold on for a minute while I get a response. Professor R.P. Banerjee to speak his remarks on Raja Ram Mohan Rai and his activities and a view of the Indian Renaissance. Professor Banerjee, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Namaskar, namaste. Well, first of all, I have a question to Dr. Devanjan Chakravarti. What is the time that you are closing? I have to join another program at 8:10.
Yes, sir. I think I would. If you could sum up in 5 minutes, then I will be able to take a couple of questions.
So I think better I should not speak.
No, sir.
In that case, better I should not speak.
Sir, I would like you to speak for a few minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, today's discussion is focused on Raja Ram Mohan Rai. I would like to call him as Ram Mohan Bandyopadhyay. I'll take his, ancestral, designation, ancestral title of Bandyopadhyay, and tell him as Ram Mohan Bandyopadhyay. I have some, reason to tell that, which I'm not going to explain. I don't have time for that. I want to mention that Ram Mohan's makeup of the mind. How was his mind, what are the contributing factors to his mind? The making of the mind of Ram Mohan Bandyopadhyay. First of all, the Persian influence was there. He had to serve the Mughals for a significant period of time. Then he had to serve the East India Company's, company for a significant period of time. And then for some period, he had to serve with Woodruff. Woodruff was here for a mission, for a reason. And he was the Munshi, meaning accounts clerk, meaning assistant clerk for him. So the influences were from the Mughal spirit, like the Raja, title that he got from the, Akbar Shah, was not accepted at the contemporary period, but we have, very lovingly call him Raja. Rai was accepted by his, father and grandfather. That's why, we love to call him as a Raja Rammohun Rai, because we respect him so much. But again, we need to understand why did he differentiate from the mainstream of India's, tradition. He did not have the proper access to the Vedas. He had access to only, 5 Upanishads. I'm just, focusing on his writing. Based on his writing, I'm telling. If you look at the, writings in his comments, his presentation of universal religion, then Kathopanishad, then Ishopanishad, Mundokopanishad, Mandukopanishad, these Upanishads, and also, Kenopanishad. He made a, English translation of Kenopanishad. Why did he come to a conclusion of, single identity of God? There is a formless identity of God, because he did not have access to the other Vedas. He had access to only 2 Vedas. I have not seen any, spark of his access, any mentioning, any remarks in any of his writings of this almost 20, literatures that he has, books and, booklets in English, in Bengali also, including those, grammar and others. Particularly these books on Vedas, Brahma Sutra. And there, what he has done is he has concentrated on Jujur Vedas and Atharva Vedas. The cult of the spirit of devotion, which India had from ancestral, ancient, Vedic period, he did not have that, which is a formed God. And therefore, when he had formed this, Brahma Samaj, at the end of his, towards the end of his life, this came up. The, spirit in Calcutta came up as a damned Hinduism because of that. Because, it had an influence from one side from Christianity and the other side from the, Mughals. This impact was so important and so great that it had overwhelmed the Vedic impact. If he had an access to some Vedas, then he would have a different opinion. And therefore, Renaissance, if you take a, liberty to analyze the Renaissance and take a parallel of the European developments, the women's rights were first, observed and first recognized in France, then England, and thereafter in India. It was also an agenda of the British government to have the women's rights in India, women education in India. And we have our, dignitaries, pathfinders like Ram Mohan and Vidyasagar. Both of them are pathfinders in this. But again, if you talk about the modern India's making, it's just the beginning of rationality that he had in, rather she had seeded in, but it's not a making of the modern India. It's but seeding of the rationals in certain aspects, which during the medieval period, Indian society had to, kind of imposition from the rulers, the foreign rulers. The society had to become like, this widow burning. It was, one person has mentioned it is only, particular to Bengal. No, it is, all India phenomenon and more prominent in Rajasthan, Central India, and Bengal also. But then it's prominent everywhere, even Northern India. I've got evidence based on that I'm telling. So, this was not there in ancient India. Indian civilization has always respected women. Our, Vedas and Upanishads, you understand, if you want to, I believe many of you might be knowing, we had 27 Vedic sages of women. 27 Vedic sages, and more names would come, but then these are so far explored. They were very, very prominent, and they were identified as the greatest of the great. And so we had a strong respect for women in our society in the ancient tradition. This was lost during the period of foreign aggressions when they were having atrocities in our families, in our societies, in our faith, and to safeguard the society, this kind of safeguard society and autonomous safeguard had emerged. So you see, what I would like to say that this Woodruff's Thomas Woodruff's son, Sir John Woodruff, Arthur Avellan, he wrote a book on principles of Tantra. And in that, after that, he wrote a book of serpent power. And that is based on the Tantra, which is again a part of the Atharva Veda. And there is a point mentioned about his, inheritance, meaning a thoughts that he has inherited from his father, whose assistant was Rammohn Roy, Raja Rammohn Roy. Now I'm calling him like that. And, his assistant was, Rammohn Bandyopadhyay. And the Woodruff had a mission. That mission was to explore the feasibilities of getting a penetration into the Indian society. That was a seeding in the mind of many Indian scholars, Indian bright people at that point of time. And that came forward in the Young India, movement, or the, New India movement, which, became a strong force later on. I have no time to tell. I had a, plan to speak on different aspects of Ramon's writing because I have a thorough, analysis of his entire set of writing. But I'm not getting into that. I have short of time. Now I'm closing by saying that I have got a great respect for him as the person who has seeded the rationales in the new India post, this dominance of India. And, that all of you know that he had gone to England to, plead for 2 reasons. One was to plead for his master, Akbar Shah's, annual money, annual contribution from the, East India Company. And he was successful. And that was one of the reasons. The other was, the bill. To protect his thought on the bill. So this was the reason. So even at the end, when he wrote a universal religion, wherein he has advocated a kind of common religion which could be accepted by everyone, irrespective of faith and origin of country of origin. Then even then he was actually carrying the mantle of his. His, I should say, employers. That shows that he had the impact of this, the Persian on one hand, the Britishers on the other hand, and Indian on the third. And that's why, there was a tendency to, bifurcate from the mainstream of Indian thoughts and Indian heritage by his followers later on. And after this, I'm not going to mention any further. I'm not going to stay, beyond 2015. Thank you very much. Thanks to Chimba for, agreeing to this. I'll mention that when it was then approached by Bengal Chamber, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry to us, to EIILM Kolkata, and I being the person heading that organization, I immediately agreed to support this program, and I'm very happy to have supported this. And thank you all others, who have participated in the talks. Special thanks to Ranjan Babu, Professor Dr. Ranjan Chakraborty. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you, everyone. I think in the interest of time, I find it very difficult to extend this any further. I think we had all the seeds of a brilliant conversation following this, but I think it's really almost 10:08 now, and I also have to need to join another call in another few minutes. So may I hand this back to colleagues at Bengal Chambers to bring the panel discussion.
If you'll indulge me for 1 second, one point I wanted to make, following from what Rupa Majumdar and Shati Bhattacharya said.
Right. Okay. Just literally 1 minute on it. Yeah.
Yes. Perhaps this may not be so well known, but I would very much encourage everybody to look at this book where an American professor, Lynn Zastupil, has argued that Ram Mohan Roy not only advanced feminism in India, but he was a feminist tour de force in Britain. And so the chapter named Ram Mohan Roy and Early Victorian Feminism goes into 30 pages. So it might be interesting for people to read that, written by Lynn Zastupil, and the book is called Ram Mohan Roy and the Making of Victorian Britain.
Thank you so much, Aniruddha.
Thank you so much. Obviously, we'll go through the book. Thank you so much. Obviously, I think it will be an enriching experience to go through the book.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I hand the conversation back to colleagues at Bengal Chamber? Over to you, Angana.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chakraborty. We would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Chakraborty, and all the panelists. It was truly a very enriching and enlightening session for us all. So we would like to also extend our gratitude to our partners today. We have with us IILM Kolkata, India Power Corporation Limited, Niyogi Technologies Research Private Limited, Calcutta Tea Traders Association, and Intac. So we are now concluding our session today, and we look forward towards take away from this enriching session. And once again, thanks to all the audience, panelists. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night to everyone.
Good night. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you to everyone.
সবাই সুস্থ থাকবেন, ভালো থাকবেন। Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.